Okay, let's go. Pedic base. We're starting on Moshe Pedic base 23. Klolei HaChinuch v'Adracha. So now he says, what are the klalim? What are the principles of education and guidance? B'ashkofa rishayna, at first glance, haritoiras HaChinuch v'Adracha, the field of education and guidance, v'toiras ha'hiro, and the field of teaching, masim meishema, seem to be quite similar. Why? Because both are one category, which are kishroinos, talents, hapoyel and baruchni, that impact the spiritual side of man. So therefore, you would want to group them together. Says the Rebbe, Aval be'emes, but in truth, shoynois heino zoi mizoi betachlis. They are entirely different. Next page, 24. Let's see how. HaChinuch v'Adracha hi avoda kosher b'chlal. Educating and guiding, generally speaking, is a very difficult task. V'avoda kveida yosa, it's a very treacherous, heavy task. More, yoter, more so, me'avodas hayiro shel harav l'talmid, than the avoda, the task of a teacher teaching students. Although gam hayiro achas or avodas hayosa koshes of kvedas, although teaching also is one of the most difficult activities, nevertheless, ein hakushi klal, its difficulty has no comparison k'moy kushi ho'avoda, like the difficulty of the task shel hachinuch v'adracha, of educating and guidance, mipnei shnei taimim. And the Rebbe says, I'll give you two reasons why it's a vast difference. One, let's let b'avoda hayro, when it comes to instruction, hariyesaskus hamoireh hi binyonim sichliyim. The primary involvement of the instructor is, what is it? He binyonim sichlim. It consists of intellectual ideas. Aleph, levayeres hamuskel. The teacher's task is to explain the idea, to explain it to the student, with parables and illustrations. Number two, the teacher's task is it is to open, to develop the student's abilities. Aleph, B'chochmas ha'amtzoah, how? By conceiving ideas, creativity. Beis, b'havonas hamoshel v'asbora, through explaining the parable and its explanation. Gimel, number three, b'diya miyusheves ubrura, with a settled, knowledge, clear. I'll call upon him. What we have from this is avodosa shel hamoida, that the task of a teacher, bahirosa, through his instruction, he ach v'rak, it is only b'inyonei seichel umada, regarding logic and information. Because even the smallest and easiest idea, is still part of the category of intellect. There's deep intellect and there's shallow intellect, but intellect at the end of the day is intellect. This... Correct. I saw that. Right. I was going to get to that. I just want to first continue at the comparison. So this all, he says, is a teacher. Hayro, instruction. Loi came b'avodas HaChinuch v'Hadracha. Unsimilarly, no comparison is the task of education and guidance. Hine al haroif, usually, hari ikra isas kusoi shel hamechanech v'hamadrich. The primary involvement, job of the educator and the guide, the mentor, who b'inyonei nibul v'chiyur. It is primarily consists of transforming base and ignoble traits, not nice traits, disgusting traits. It's not about teaching knowledge. It's about teaching him a method of ridding himself of bad, ugly traits. Ubefrat. More specifically, the initial idea of education and guidance, the Ayor Pera Odom Yevolet, he quotes the verse, man is born like a wild young donkey, Vitivius Urigilius Bahamius, with animalistic impulses and behavior that is natural, tiviyut, natural to him. Drawing man after material good, and drawing him to what's usually visually attractive. And it is the job of the mechanech, the educator, and the mentor guide to show him how to remove himself from these ugly character traits. And now he goes back to, he's going back and forth in showing the difference between the two. Next paragraph. Avodas hayiro belimud, the task of the teacher in instructing through teaching, although, like I said, the Rebbe says, there's much responsibility for a teacher to teach, to explain, to clarify. Yonason made it very nice and clear. Chochma bina das, to teach him how to be creative, not just be a puppet, a parakeet, the repeating things. Can you come up with an idea yourself? Chochma, creativity, bina, analysis, das, concentration. And that's all the job of a teacher. The teacher is responsible, he says, achrayis, is responsible to show a student, to teach a student how to develop those talents. Avol, back to the text, Avol, however, einena klal ke'achriyusa shelo avoda b'chinuch v'hadracha. It is not at all comparable to the responsibility of an educator and a mentor and a guide. Why? Because when it comes to instruction through teaching, even if it's what? It doesn't have an impact, right? One thing's for sure. You didn't ruin the student. The student came in not knowing how to be creative. You tried teaching him how to be creative. It didn't work. You didn't get it. He didn't get it. Okay. He's the same person. You didn't make him any worse. Like Cain. Conversely, when it comes to educating and guidance, the responsibility, Moshe, is tremendous. If you don't correct the student in the areas of these flaws that he has, he's going to get worse. So, Yoni, by you not succeeding as an educator And as a guide mentor, it's not only that he'll be the same that he came in, it's going to get worse because we want more indulgences, and you get more grub and more course, and it's a fact of life. So the responsibility, the Rebbe says, of the mechanech and the guide mentor is much greater. Here, there's no room for, okay, didn't succeed, he'll be the same. He'll be without the knowledge. He won't have creativity, he'll have analysis. You know what I'm saying? Okay. He'll have analysis, he won't be creative, but, he's basically the same mensch. Here, he becomes less of a mensch. Therefore, someone who educates someone, whether it be someone who's old in years, whether he's young in years, it's necessary, absolutely necessary. Next page, top of 27. He must watch and guard the rules that are necessary to help the student rid himself or herself of these ugly character traits. Asher bilodam. Without them, and if the guide and mentor and educator doesn't do that, he repeats again, not only did he not correct the situation in the student, older or younger, he actually ruined him. That's a very, very heavy statement, but the Rebbe says that. So the Rebbe here makes it very, very clear that we have a very, very big difference between a teacher and an educator. Now, we lump both of these words together in our vocabulary and in our way we think and all that. But in the Kuntris, the Rebbe says if you stop and think and you analyze the two, it's, as we say in Hebrew, rachok mimizrach lemayrav. It's as distant from the east to the west. Because one has the responsibility to teach knowledge, and one has the responsibility to educate and guide in behavior. So really, you're talking about we're talking about two different methods that are required here. And that's why there can be an excellent teacher. And think about your teachers in school, in university, and shiurim. One teacher can be gewaldig in teaching. Clarity, explanation. But he doesn't teach you how to get rid of those nigei halev, the issues that are not good for character and behavior. Menschlichkeit, midas rois, what we call musar, right? And the Rebbe says that only an educator and a guide is charged, not only, to accomplish this, you need an educator and a guide. In Chassidus, what do we call this in Chabad? A mashpia. That's the job of mashpia. Today, fortunately or unfortunately, we've lumped together a mashpia, teaching you Chassidus, and a mashpia. And I'm on a campaign, and I haven't succeeded yet, but I won't give up, that every Chabad community, not a Chabad, every Jewish community needs a mashpia outside of a rabbi. A rabbi is a rav. That's his job. Now, if the rabbi functions as a mashpia and he has someone else to paskin the shilas, so be it. But what I'm saying is that a community, and in the yeshiva world too, what I see in the yeshiva world is they have great rabbis, great teachers, and very few mashpiyim. Or in the Litvische world, they call them mashgichim, the mashgiach. You have. I'm not saying but not enough. Way. In other words, there's so much emphasis on the yediyah, the knowledge, and there's so much less emphasis on the hashpah and the hashgacha. You can have one mashgiach for 100 boys, and you can have 10 magidei shiurim for 100 boys, or 5 magidei shiurim. And what the Rebbe is saying here, really, if you extract it and you bring it into the real world, he's saying, really, you should have more mashgichim. And the truth is, that's why in his system, in the Rashab and the Rayatz's educational system of Chabad Yeshiva, that's the way he made his yeshiva in 1897. And this is written for them, right? This is what he's saying, and this is what they followed. Do you know that when they opened the yeshiva, they didn't have a Rosh Yeshiva? I mean, you go tell Slobodka that, or Vlozhin, or Mir, or Kletsk, or Lakewood, I mean, they'll laugh at you. What do you mean you don't have a Rosh Yeshiva? The Rashab started with Talmidim who were very big Talmidei Chachamim. Again, 18-year-olds to 20-year-olds who already were full of Torah. Whether he knows this pshat or that pshat, that wasn't the issue. But the character is, you have yesh and ego and ugliness and needs refinement and all that. Oh, so the Rashab said, I'm appointing 2 mashpiyim. He doesn't even talk about a Rosh Yeshiva. Could you imagine? A person opens a yeshiva at the height of Askola, enlightenment, with everything else that's going on, no Rosh Yeshiva. Because he's saying, at that time, the main thing is the character and how they're going to be strong enough to fight off enlightenment, Askola, and secular Zionism, etc., right? So that's what he does. Now, even later, as the Chabad yeshivas continued in Russia and Ukraine, and then later in Eretz Yisrael and in America, etc., and all over, where they already incorporated the Rosh Yeshiva, the mainstay, and this I could see the Litvische world really having an issue with, was the Mashpiyim. Till today in Chabad, the Mashpiyim are like the main attraction to a yeshiva. Now, let me say, for the record, it should be clear, we have some excellent Rosh Yeshiva, big Talmidei Chachamim, and some are, like for example, Los Angeles. I learned by Rabbi, when I was a 20-year-old, we were sent, 10 of us, from Morristown, the Rabbinical College of Morristown, the yeshiva, to Los Angeles as older Bacharim Shluchim, right? Mentors for the young ones. And our Rosh Yeshiva was Rabbi Shochat, Rabbi Ezra Shochat. He's a Goin. He's a Talmud of Lakewood, a Talmud of Brisk, and he's a Lubavitcher. So, but he's a Goin to Shekop, and he was a real Rosh Yeshiva. I mean, he gave shiurim for 2-3 hours sometimes. I mean, it was amazing. We just had a group 40-year Zoom, and I spoke about that. I said, they asked everyone, what's your main thing you remember from those 2 years you were spending in Los Angeles? And I said, to me, to see this man in action was a life lesson for me. Because I came from Chabad here in Crown Heights, with Rabbi Yoel Kahn the Mashpia, Melech Tzibul the Mashpia in Morristown. They were my main reason for growth and attraction, and of course the Rebbe and Hasidim. And here, I mean, and we had Rosh Yeshiva, but this was he's an exception. So it was very interesting. At age 20, you're not a child anymore. To take a look at a person like that. I mean, I remember from time every 6 months or a year, we would publish a journal of Pilpulim, scholarly dissertations on Talmudic topics. And he was in charge. And in fact, the Rebbe told him years before in Yechidus to do that. And because of that, he was blessed with twins. It's a whole story. He didn't have children, or he had, but he didn't have for many years. And the Rebbe told him to write Chidush Torah. So he did, and right away he had twins. So that's another thing. Anyway, so I saw him in the library in Los Angeles, sometimes 2-3 in the morning. I was up then too, and no one else was up, was sleeping. He was in there with Svarim piled up, and his head was buried before he had to produce the Kovetz, the journal of, so a fascinating Talmud Chacham. Nevertheless, to us, coming from where we came from, he wasn't compared to Rabbi Yoel Kahn, our Mashpia and our teacher of Chassidus. He took second place because that was the way the Chabad system from 1897 developed itself. And I'm not going now into it's better, it's worse. I'm just telling you on the Kuda. So we do have big Rosh Hashiva in Chabad, but the Mashpia is the Iker. And why? Because of what we're learning right here, what we just learned. What does the Rebbe say here? Hillel, what does the Rebbe say? He says here that it's more, you can't compare the teacher of information, who even the best of teachers, to the mechanech and the madrich, the educator and the guide, who's dealing with getting rid of what he calls, let's look at the language, nibul v'kiur, ugliness, and, bad character. And that remained a mainstay. And this opens up for us an entire other issue to think about. And that is why in the Chabad yeshiva system, from that time until today, the emphasis is more on the avodah than the learning, although there's a lot of learning. The Rashab set up to learn 7 hours a day Gemara and 3 hours a day Chassidus. And in Lubavitch, I heard from Reb Avram Mayor, who was a student there, who was passed on, of course. He told me they would learn from 12 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock Gemara. Okay, that's 7 hours. And he said that the good students would try not to go to the bathroom to take a break in those 7 hours. That's how committed they were to learning the Gemara. So if anyone tells you that in Lubavitch they don't emphasize Gemara, it's a lie. Simply not true. Nevertheless, what is the ikar of the learning is the avodah, is the refinement of character. Okay, now what do you guys say about this?
Very question about that. So I'm trying to understand something. Why would anyone, Litvish, Hasidish, Chabad, be against avodah? What we learn, we're supposed to put into practice. Why would anyone be against that? I'm just trying to understand.
Okay. So I would take the word against out. It's not against, but the question is, Yoni, what is the ikar of a yeshiva curriculum? So, for example, I'll answer your question with a historical fact. Do you know that in the Litvish yeshivas, in various ones, there were very big disagreements about learning Musar as part of the curriculum? And this issue was such a hot cake that there were fights. And yeshivas closed temporarily because of it. I documented a lot of this in my books. And the Litvish yeshivas don't like to talk about it because it's a red flag. But that's the facts. Because they felt, now understand what they felt. Let's say Reb Chaim Brisker, you're talking about, or a Baruch Ber, Leibowitz, a Kamenetz, okay? They were against having formal Musar in the yeshiva. Why? They said, for that, you do outside of the curriculum, on your free time. Instead of reading books in the library, secular books, read Musar, learn Musar. The other school of thought of Slabodka, Reb Moshe Mordechai, Reb Finkel, the great-grandfather of today's Rosh Hashiva, he said, everyone must learn Musar, and he says, Musar is the mainstay of the yeshiva. And this was such a machlokes. You can't imagine what this caused in Europe in the Lithuanian yeshivas. So it's not only that they're against avodah. The question is if avodah should take away from the time of learning Gemara. And most yeshivas felt it should not. Our Rebbe, he had this ongoing push more with the Hasidic Rebbes than the Litvish Rosh Hashiva, because they didn't come to see him and they didn't kind of listen to him at all anyway, outwardly at least. But the Hasidic Rebbes, let's say Toldos Aaron, 1963, he comes to see the Rebbe in Crown Heights from Meir Sharon. And the Rebbe speaks to him about teaching Hasidus. And the Rebbe says, you don't have to teach Chabad Hasidus. You're not a Chabad yeshiva. But more of a Shamish, which is Klolei, what you should make it part of the curriculum. And the Rebbe did this with the Belzer Rebbe, I think, in 1981. And with the Ger Rebbe, the Pnei Menachem. And they even, between themselves and others, they had their comments, some positive, some negative. But the point is, the Rebbe was relentless. This was his number one thing with the Rebbes was, why don't you institute the study of Chassidus, of your Chassidus, of Noam Elimelech, any Chassidus, but Chassidus should be a regular part of the curriculum. And it wasn't in their yeshivas. So not only wasn't it in Litvish yeshivas, even the Hasidic yeshivas it wasn't. So what I mean to say, part of the curriculum, the way it's in Chabad, Yoni, is 7:30 in the morning, we came into the yeshiva, till 9 o'clock, we all had the same svarim, and we learned the same text, like we're doing now, and then twice or three times a week we had a shir, by the mashpil gave a shir in it, and then we reviewed the shir, and then we asked questions, like you learn of Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos, and you want to understand Pshat. And that's what the Rashab wanted. The Rashab wanted that the study of Chassidus should be, and I'm talking about now the study, I'm not talking about the avoid, I'm talking about the study, should be on par to Nigla, to Talmud. Then there's the idea of Hashpah. Hashpah and Hashgacha. In the Chabad world it's called Hashpah, in the Hasidic world, in the literature world it's called Hashgacha. There you see what the previous Rebbe writes here. He says this is a mainstay. Now let's go historically and see how it makes sense. Because here he is talking to these two mashpiyim. He has students who are big, have great knowledge of Gemara and Halacha, but Hasidus they don't know as much and as far as their character, they feel so big about themselves. Yeshes, I know so much, They tell over of a great chassid who became later a big, and he was a Baki in Shas, Rabbi Avram Elia Plotkin. His son is a friend of mine, he's a rabbi in Toronto, and he came from a Litvish yeshiva to Lubavitch in the early 1900s. And he came in with, a lot of knowledge, but he had he had ego. So when it came time to bake matzahs for Pesach, the Rebbe Rashab gave him the job, or maybe the previous Rebbe, gave him the job of like rolling the pins where he worked up a big sweat. And he came and he said, like, this is too much for me. In other words, he's used to using his mind and learning, and here he's physically rolling pins for matzah and he's sweating away. And the Rashab said, this is what you need to break your yesh. And it worked. It worked. So what do we see? Here is this genius bacher who knows Shas, but he's using yesh, he's using gaiva, ego. So the Rashab found a way of dealing with it. So you see again how this was a mainstay in the yeshiva, and that's what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying over here, that an educator, a mechanech, and a madrich, and a guide are a very different animal than a teacher. Both are necessary. But he says if you start putting them together and mixing up the roles, you're going to have a disaster. And as he says, if a person doesn't have information, no, he'll have a little less information. But if you don't correct the student's behavior and midos, it just gets worse and worse. Any final questions or from anybody, or we are done? Okay. Yes.
I just wanted to sort of comment on this from wearing my other hat. In neuroscience today, one of the key sort of themes is that the human nervous system develops really in relationships. That it's our primary relationships that form our nervous system, and our brains don't really develop when we're denied kind of the essential relationships early in life. They don't develop in the same way. So it seems like a similar kind of theme here, comparing a mashpia to a teacher. I mean, we all have had those kinds of teachers who all they care about is communicating certain kind of information, and they don't care. You have to, if you want it, you've got to work for it. From those who really set out to make a connection with you as a learner, those are the ones who stay with you.
Right, I hear. Very good. Yes, Moshe.
I just want to make a point that today, in Chabad yeshivas, you also have a mashgiach. It's interesting. You have a mashpia, and you also have mashgichim.
Yeah, but those mashgichim are different than the mashgichim in a Litvish yeshiva. Those mashgichim check off what time you came if you came late.
Right.
We're talking in the Litvish world, I believe. Maybe I think mashgiach. I know here, Rabbi Wolfson of Torah Vadas was the mashgiach. In other words, he gave the Musar, the Ruchnius,
Yeah, I hear that. Okay, I understand. Yeah, I hear that.
Okay. Anything else?
So, Rabbi, tomorrow is a very different schedule. It's Yom HaChinuch here, so I'm probably not going to be around in the afternoon. I'm not sure of my schedule, but I'm going to be
okay. Everyone should be matzliach. Okay, we will continue learning Chassidus, and that will be my participation in Yom HaChinuch. And maybe we should help. We should have the essence of Yom HaChinuch, which is Mashiach B'Poyel Mamish. So please make sure, Hillel, wherever you are, grab Mashiach and tell him to stay here already. Bye bye. Have a good day. Take care. Oh, by the way, today is L'Chatchila Rebbe. Today is the Rebbe Marash's Yom HaLedus, and it's the whole message of over the top. Over the top. L'Chatchila Rebbe. Sei gesund. Take care.